He's the author of 4 books, including Combating Cult Mind Control, Freedom of the Mind, and the Cult of Trump. And today he's here to discuss his latest book, which explores Opus Dei, which is an order that many of you have not heard of before, and its implications on American politics. Dr. Hassan, it's a real pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So, for our audience and folks who are hearing about these topics for the first time, what is Opus Dei and how might it be related to this, our currently growing understanding of this group of folks known as the Theo Bros and their role in American politics?
Okay, well, my expertise is really psychology and how the mind can get hacked and how people
Mm,
can rescue loved ones.
mm,
Not primarily a political person, although I've had to dive into politics when I was researching the cult of Trump that originally came out in 2019. And I wrote about Opus Dei being one of the puppet masters of the cult of Trump. I had Putin as number one. I had a cult called The Family that Jeffrey Charlotte wrote 2 books about and did a Netflix series about. And then I put Opus Dei as number three. And then I have New Apostolic Reformation mega churches, which are
mm.
the people who claim to be apostles and prophets who say God said Trump won the election in 2020. So they have 30, 40 million Americans believing that nonsense. To answer your question, so Opus Dei is a group I've helped people regarding for decades, and they've applied my BITE model of authoritarian control. And BITE stands for controlling behavior, controlling information, controlling thoughts, and controlling emotions to make a
Mm.
dependent and obedient identity to the group.
Wow.
So I knew about Opus Dei for a really long time, but as I was researching the cult of Trump, I realized William Barr is an Opus Dei, then Attorney
Oh.
General. And I understood that this was a right-wing Catholic authoritarian cult
Mm.
which recently the Pope has demoted and ostracized
Wow.
because of trafficking, criminal trafficking lawsuits against Opus Dei. And also, Opus Dei has been putting out disinformation about the Pope, that he's satanic and, that he shouldn't be speaking for climate change or for immigrants' rights and other, kind of human rights things.
Wow.
So Opus Dei was a personal prelature of a previous pope. They made the saint out of the leader, Escriba. I really cite and recommend your listeners get a book by UK financial journalist Gareth Gore called Opus, and I interviewed Gareth for my podcast, The Influence Continuum. This is a deep dive in the whole history of Opus Dei and names
Mm.
names, including the Heritage Foundation, Project
Oh, wow.
2025, Pat Cipollone, Barr, talks about the Catholic Information Center in DC.
Huh.
And essentially, the organization is the opposite of what Jesus teaches.
Wow.
Jesus was like, render unto politics, render to Caesar what
That is
Caesar.
Caesar's.
Now, this is a group that says we need a theocracy to
Mm.
rule the world, and we want to get rid of all dissonant voices, and we want to roll back liberty and women's rights and gay rights and
Wow.
indigenous rights. We want, basically male supremacy. It's so interesting. Leonard Leo sent his kids to Opus Dei schools.
No
So
way.
there's a link to the Supreme Court and the Federalist Society here too. Although Gareth Gore in his research basically said that Leonard Leo worked his recruitment magic on this Jewish billionaire who donated $1.6 billion to Leonard Leo to set up a new group. So he kind of
Wow.
became a traitor to the Federalist Society and has his own thing now, but the links to Opus Dei seem very solid.
And it seems as though, as you've noted, that they are influencing most of our political institutions. That we focused a lot on this show on Leonard Leo and the Federal Society, particularly because of their connection to the Supreme Court. And so it feels as though, I'm extrapolating from what you've just said, but it feels as though this religious order, which many have I think properly identified as a cult, or at least participating in cultish behaviors, has also got its hands in the picking and selecting of Supreme Court justices who just so happen to then issue rulings that seem to favor people who benefit from this sort of approach. Now, there
Yep.
was a time when I was back in law school, and if I'd have said any of this stuff, I would have been considered, I was already considered one of those radical thinkers. But this is one of those things that people would have said, oh, this is the stuff of mythology. This is pure fiction. This is, and I went to law school before The Handmaid's Tale, but this is purely something out of TV. It feels, however, as I'm watching the news, both locally or domestically and internationally, Opus Dei, as you'd mentioned, has come under fire for alleged participation in trafficking, human trafficking, and in addition to a variety of other sorts of challenges. I believe, I want to say in Argentina, there's been a crackdown. Don't.
Exactly.
Okay, yes. So this is an international effort, and for me, one of the concerns is that this international effort is both is reflected in so many ways and reciprocated from many members of our governing society here. And this article out of Mother Jones that looks at J.D. Vance and his connection to groups who think like this, based on your understanding of how cults work and how the fact that your acronym bites, behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions. We deal a lot with the power of thoughts and emotions on this show. So that you said that, yeah, I didn't plan that. We had a whole segment dealing with the power of thoughts earlier this morning. But this idea that these organized, well-funded institutions are able to collaborate with individuals in key positions in a way that produces a type of thinking that is allowed to elicit a sort of emotion that is based on misinformation that then results in behavioral changes. It feels to me like that is way too close to the White House in terms of our politics. Give us your sense as to what a political embrace of this sort of theology would look like for those of us in America who many of whom we've never even considered that this could be a possibility. Paint for us, if you could, what it might look like if this sort of theocracy takes hold here.
Yeah, so I didn't realize you were an attorney, and I would like to say that I did my doctoral dissertation to update the law regarding undue influence because
Wow.
it's a 300-year-old, British common law around property and give
Mm.
somebody taking somebody's property away from the rightful heirs. And what I and as an activist and a mental health professional, I realized the law is about 100 years out of date with understanding the human mind and neuroscience and social psychology. So I did my dissertation on my bite model as a scientifically now validated construct. So
Mm.
it's not a slippery slope, and I'm using trafficking law, which is international, as the foundation for explaining brainwashing models than my model, and a law professor's model called the social influence model that looks at influencee and influencer and how to explain to judges and juries that minds can get hacked. People's beliefs can get changed by very systematic social influence processes, including hypnosis. So to answer your question, forgive me for the
No, no, no.
setup, but I
Yeah.
want your listeners to understand where I'm coming from. Americans don't understand that we are in a moment in history like Germany in the 30s before Hitler got voted into power. Like
Mm.
it's that close an analogy. And and essentially people don't realize Hitler was voted into office and then he abolished the Constitution and set up his Gestapo and his SS troops, and they started rounding up critics and killing them or sending them to concentration camps. Trump's announcing all of these plans. Project 2025 is announcing all of these plans. And the way it looks to me, it's authoritarians versus people who want human rights, rule of law, support for the Constitution, support for separation of church and state. These are authoritarians that think they're the elite. They're chosen by God, and therefore they get to choose and tell everyone else how to live and what to believe and what they can't believe.
Wow.
And this election, not just the presidential level, but everything below it, is going to be absolutely pivotal that we have a record turnout if we want to turn this around. Because Opus Dei has been working on this project for decades.
Wow.
The Moonies, my former cult, have been working on this project for decades,
Mm.
and that many of them are working together. And that's a thesis in the cult of Trump that people don't get unless they read the book, that there are actual authoritarian cults influencing the politicians, including Trump. And there are authoritarian cults who are bringing their membership to support the
Wow.
policies of Trump. So it's this manipulation of tens of millions of people in these authoritarian, often religious cults. And Opus Dei is at the top of the control pyramid, unfortunately, because they concentrate their power in Washington, D.C.
Wow. So in this world, let's say record turnout, it turns out that Vice President Kamala Harris does not win, and we have a President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, which in my positive, I'm believing that will quickly be a President J.D. Vance. I've gone so far as to think that he will probably, once he becomes president, nominate someone like a Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, to then be the Vice President. And if they have the House, and they'll be able to vote him in as Vice President because the House would be able to make that determination. And so, from my vantage point, this could get really bad, really, really quickly. Just by way of understanding, in a theocratic America, in an Opus Dei led America, do we still have things like the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act or the 19th Amendment? Are any of those protections still allowed to exist in any meaningful way?
No,
He's
they're going
shaking
to
his
be
head no,
voted
folks.
away. They're going to
Wow.
be voted. We may not have a national vote. And, what people need to understand is that Vladimir Putin was raised in the Soviet Union, was a KGB official, and when Russia fell, he was very, very angry and upset at
Mm,
America. We
mm,
were the great Satan. And when he took over power and he did a false flag, he actually had his people bomb Russians to blame the Chechens in order for him to gain power. This is Putin now.
mm,
Um, he's been hard at work, spending hundreds of millions of dollars infiltrating the United States, infiltrating the NRA, promoting assault rifles rights. Like, do you think people in Russia can own assault rifles privately? You would
mm.
be put in jail if they found a bullet in your car, if you were not a military official, by the way. But he's been working on programming Americans to believe, to distrust the government, to do active civil war.
Hmm.
My former cult has a gun factory making AR-15s and has training compounds in Tennessee and Waco, Texas.
Jesus.
Michael Flynn is going around the country with the Moonies at the
That's
Rod of Iron Freedom Festivals,
right.
whipping people up for civil war against the libs, everybody who is a minority, women's rights, gay rights, indigenous rights. No, no, no. This is evil in their mindset. So we
Hmm.
really are at a very critical moment. We have had people like General Milley speaking out about how Trump is a fascist. And Vance was handpicked, my understanding, by Peter Thiel
Right.
and Elon Musk to take over. Trump never wanted to rule, actually run things. He likes to party. He never reads books. He's a very, very disturbed, you know, puppet, basically.
Yeah.
Only he's hard to control now because he has such extreme dementia.
Mm.
So Vance is the person who's going to be running the country, and he'll do whatever he's told or else.
And Vance is, I don't know if he's actually smart, but he's smart enough to at least listen well. And I remember after the debate, there were articles that were literally talking about the blueness of his eyes, as if the cosmetic appeal that he presents was going to be sufficient to cause people to not ask questions. But then, to your point, a lot of people did not ask questions and are still not asking questions. And then a few weeks ago, folks in the audience, you may recall, we talked about the fact that there were reports out that many American influencers, Tim Pool and a number of others, were on the Russian payroll and were being well funded, $100,000 an episode to produce videos that were of this ilk. And now we have seen that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada testified under oath just last week. We saw the video where he says, yeah, Tucker Carlson, Jordan Peterson, these very manosphere type characters are on the payroll for the Russian propaganda machine. So everything you're saying has already checked out. And so this is
Yeah, and
why
it's
it's hard
good
to
that
sleep at night.
getting confirmation about the
Yes.
Russian connection. I've talked about Russia, in 2019 in my book. I put
Wow.
Putin at the top of the puppet masters. And
Mm.
and honestly, my editor, when I submitted the text for the book, the Mueller report was just coming out, and Bill Barr was
Wow.
saying there's no Russian collusion. My editor was telling me to take out Putin and Russia. And I said, over my dead body, Barr is not being honest to the
Right.
American public. If you read the Mueller report, the
Right.
Russians manipulated the election, and
Mm.
and and Trump would never have been elected without Russian interference.
What are we to do? And of course, I want you to solve this problem for us in the 4 minutes that we have left.
Well, the
What can we
thing is
possibly do?
that the thing is that we have a public health emergency. And we have a mind control virus. It should be thought
Mm.
of as a virus where we need to do inoculation. We need to teach people about my influence continuum, the bite model, malignant narcissist predator characteristics of Hitler that
Yeah.
applies to every cult leader. We need to inoculate people. We need to train mental health professionals, media professionals, educators, politicians, and we need to develop intervention programs. And I can teach people how to do that if there
Mm.
was a will. And then we need to destigmatize the fact that intelligent people's minds can be hacked and
Yes.
they can return to normal. And we need to welcome people back to common sense
Yeah.
instead of calling them names like they're morons or stupid. That's the worst possible thing you could say to someone whose mind has been hacked. And I'm
Mm.
speaking as a former cult member.
Oh my goodness, Dr. Hassan, I really hope we can get you to come back on this show. I would love to have you explore more of the BITE model, behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions. And you have talked a few times, you've mentioned the Moonies and the fact that this was a cult that you were a part of. So you're not just talking about this from a purely disconnected academic space. You have lived this.
No,
And
I
that,
was with Moon in 1974 when he talked
wow.
about democracy being satanic. We need a theocracy and how we're going to infiltrate the government and take over. That was 50 years ago. I was
Mm,
in the room believing that this was a good thing. I fasted
mm,
for Nixon during Watergate because of Moon telling me to, and I hated Nixon before.
yeah,
So
yeah,
this is real. I recommend people come to freedomofmind.com, my
yes.
website. I have a Substack where I blog. I have an Influence Continuum podcast. I've written these books. And we need to educate ourselves and people that we know in our networks. And
Mm,
it's not, even if we have a sweep, a blue sweep in the next few weeks, this
yes.
is going to be a decade to 20, 30 years to clean up the mess of the last 50 years that the extremist right wing have been working on this, dismantling checks and balances in our country.
Wow. Well, at the risk of being a little too on the nose, I thank God for you. I thank God for your journey. And when you mentioned Hitler, I was born and raised in Germany, spent a significant portion of my childhood there. And what you're talking about, seeing what I'm seeing arise in Germany again, in this modern era where there were times where you would never walk around with swastikas, or you would not be able to, because there were social and legal ramifications for it. So to see even the return of some of this in that country, these are the things that keep me up at night. But I'm definitely going to be getting your books. I'll be listening to the podcast. I'm going to visit you at freedomofmind.com, and I encourage the audience to do as well. But I will say this, I'm encouraged, because if you were in that moment in 1974, if you were in that time and here you are today, then there is hope for all of us who are looking at family members, friends who have had their minds hacked. And I love that you said it that way, because I have been guilty of calling them dumb, and I will stop doing
Don't
that.
call them dumb. There's a
Yeah.
lot of brilliant people. They've just been deceived and their minds have been hacked. And a
Mm.
lot of it's through social media on
Yes.
their phones.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, I appreciate that. It's a much more appropriate frame, I think, and it's certainly one that I'm ready to walk in and do better on my own. So thank you so much for being with us today. I do hope we can get you back on the show. Would love to continue this discussion.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Take care. Take care.